The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Book 2, Part 2, The Archaic Symbolism of the World Religions. Section 18, On the Myth of the Fallen Angel in its various aspects. Subsection A, The Evil Spirit, Who and What. Our present quarrel is exclusively with theology. The Church enforces belief in a personal God and a personal devil, while occultism shows the fallacy of such a belief. And though for the pantheists and occultists, as much as for the pessimists, nature is no better than a comely mother, but stone cold. This is true only so far as regards external physical nature. They both agree that, to the superficial observer, she is no better than an immense slaughterhouse wherein butchers become victims, and victims executioners in their turn. It is quite natural that the pessimistically inclined profane, once convinced of nature's numerous shortcomings and failures, and especially of her autophagous propensities, should imagine this to be the best evidence that there is no deity in absconditur within nature, nor anything divine in her. Nor is it less natural that the materialist and the physicist should imagine that everything is due to blind force and chance, and to the survival of the strongest, even more often than of the fittest. But the occultists, who regard physical nature as a bundle of most varied illusions on the plane of deceptive perceptions, who recognize in every pain and suffering but the necessary pangs of incessant procreation, a series of stages toward an ever-growing perfectibility, which is visible in the silent influence of never-erring karma, or abstract nature. The occultists, we say, view the Great Mother otherwise. Woe to those who live without suffering. Stagnation and death is the future of all that vegetates without a change. And how can there be any change for the better without proportionate suffering during the preceding stage? Is it not those only who have learnt the deceptive value of earthly hopes and the elusive allurements of external nature who are destined to solve the great problems of life, pain, and death? If our modern philosophers, preceded by the medieval scholars, have helped themselves to more than one fundamental idea of antiquity, theologians have built their God and his archangels, their Satan and his angels, along with the Logos and his staff, entirely out of the dramatis personae of the old heathen pantheons. They would have been welcome to these had they not cunningly distorted the original characters, perverted the philosophical meaning, and taken advantage of the ignorance of Christendom, the result of long ages of mental sleep, during which humanity was permitted to think only by proxy, tossed every symbol into the most inextricable confusion. One of their most sinful achievements in this direction was the transformation of the divine alter ego into the grotesque Satan of their theology. As the whole philosophy of the problem of evil hangs upon the correct comprehension of the constitution of the inner being of nature and man, of the divine within the animal, and hence also the correctness of the whole system as given in these pages with regard to the crown piece of evolution, man, we cannot take sufficient precautions against theological subterfuge. When the good Saint Augustine and the fiery Tertullian called the devil the monkey of God, this could be attributed to the ignorance of the age they lived in. It is more difficult to excuse our modern writers on the same ground. The translation of Mazdean literature has afforded to the Roman Catholic writers the pretext for proving their point in the same direction once more. They have taken advantage of the dual nature of Ahura Mazda in the Zend-Avesta and the Vendidad, and of his armchair-spence, to emphasize still further their wild theories. Satan is the plagiarist and the copyist by anticipation of the religion which came ages later. This was one of the masterstrokes of the Latin Church, its best trump card after the appearance of spiritualism in Europe. Though only a succès d'estime in general, even among those who are not interested in either theosophy or spiritualism, Yet the weapon is often used by the Christian Roman Catholic Kabbalists against the Eastern occultists. Now even the materialists are quite harmless, and may be regarded as the friends of theosophy when compared to some fanatical, quote, Christian, unquote, as they call themselves, quote, sectarian, unquote, as we call them, Kabbalists on the continent. These read the Zohar not to find in it ancient wisdom, but to discover in its verses, by mangling the texts and meaning, Christian dogmas where none could ever have been meant, and, having fished them out with the collective help of the Jesuitical casuistry and learning, the supposed, quote, Kabbalists, unquote, proceed to write books and to mislead less far-sighted students of the Kabbalah. Note, such a pseudo-Kabbalist was the Marquis de Merville in France, who, having studied the Zohar and other old remnants of Jewish wisdom under the Chevalier Drac, an ancient rabbi Kabbalist converted to the Romish Church, wrote with his help 6 volumes full of slander and calumnies against every prominent spiritualist and Kabbalist. From 1848 up to 1860, he persecuted unrelentingly the old Comte d'Auchet, one of the earliest Eastern occultists in France, a man the scope of whose occult knowledge will never be appreciated correctly by his survivors, because he screened his real beliefs and knowledge under the mask of Spiritism. End of note. May we not then be permitted to drag the deep rivers of the past and thus bring to the surface the root idea that led to the transformation of the wisdom god, who had first been regarded as the creator of everything that exists, into an angel of evil, a ridiculous horned biped, half goat and half monkey, with hooves and a tail? We need not go out of the way to compare the pagan demons of either Egypt, India, or Chaldea with their devil of Christianity, for no such comparison is possible. But we may stop to glance at the biography of the Christian devil, a piratical reprint from the Chaldeo-Judean mythology. The primitive origin of this personification rests upon the Akkadian conception of the cosmic powers, the heavens and the earth, in eternal feud and struggle with chaos. Their Selig Muludak, the god amongst all the gods, the merciful guardian of men on earth, was the son of Hir, or Ea, the great god of wisdom, called by the Babylonians Nebu. With both peoples, as in the case of the Hindu gods, their deities were both beneficent and maleficent. As evil and punishment are the agents of karma, in an absolutely just, retributive sense, so evil was the servant of the good. From Hewitt Lectures, 1887, pages 101 to 115. The reading of the Chaldeo-Assyrian tiles has now demonstrated it beyond a shadow of doubt. We find the same idea in the Zohar. Satan was a son and an angel of God. With all the Semitic nations, the spirit of the earth was as much the creator in his own realm as the spirit of the heavens. They were twin brothers and interchangeable in their functions, were not two in one. Nothing of that which we find in Genesis is absent from the Chaldeo-Assyrian religious beliefs, even in the little that has hitherto been deciphered. The great face of the deep of Genesis is traced in the Tohu Bohu, deep, primeval space, or chaos of the Babylonians. Wisdom, the great unseen God, called in Genesis chapter 1 the Spirit of God, lived for the older Babylonians as for the Akkadians in the sea of space. Toward the days described by Berosus, this sea became the visible waters on the face of the earth, the crystalline abode of the Great Mother, the mother of Ea and all the gods, which became still later the great dragon Tiamat, the sea serpent. Its last stage of development was the great struggle of Bel with the dragon, the devil. Whence the Christian idea that God cursed the devil? The God of the Jews, whomsoever he was, forbids cursing Satan. Philo-Judaeus and Josephus both state that the law, the Pentateuch and the Talmud, undeviatingly forbid one to curse the adversary, as also the gods of the Gentiles. "Thou shalt not revile the gods," quoth the God of Moses in Exodus 22, verse 28. "For it is God who hath divided them unto all nations." Deuteronomy 4, verse 19. And those who speak evil of dignities, gods, are called filthy dreamers by Jude. 8. For even Michael the archangel durst not bring against him the devil a railing accusation, but said, "The Lord rebuke thee." Same source 9. Finally, the same is repeated in the Talmud. For this see Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, 487 sequence. Satan appeared one day to a man who used to curse him daily, and said to him, "Why dost thou this? Consider that God himself would not curse me, but merely said, 'The Lord rebuke thee, Satan.'" Note, treated on Kiddushim 81, but see Kabbalah by Mr. I. Mayer, pages 92-94, and the Zohar quoted in his volume. End of note. This bit of Talmudic information shows plainly two things. A, that Saint Michael is called God in the Talmud, and somebody else the Lord. And B, that Satan is a god, of whom even the Lord is in fear. All we read in the Zohar and other Kabbalistic works on Satan shows plainly that this personage is simply the personification of the abstract evil, which is the weapon of karmic law and karma. It is our human nature and man himself, as it is said, that Satan is always near and inextricably interwoven with man. It is only a question of that power being latent or active in us. It is a well-known fact, to learned symbologists at all events, that in every great religion of antiquity it is the Logos Demiurge, the second Logos, or the first emanation from the mind, Mahat, who is made to strike, so to say, the keynote of that which may be called the correlation of individuality and personality in the subsequent scheme of evolution. The Logos it is, who's shown in the mystic symbolism of cosmogony, theogony, and anthropogony, playing two parts in the drama of creation and being, that is, that of the purely human personality and the divine impersonality of the so-called avatars, or divine incarnations, and of the universal spirit called Christos by the Gnostics, and the Farvashi, or Ferue, of Ahura Mazda in the Mazdean philosophy. On the lower rungs of theogony, the celestial beings of lower hierarchies had each a Farvashi, or a celestial double. It is the same, only still more mystic, reassertion of the Kabbalistic axiom, Deus est daemon inversus. The word demon, however, as in the case of Socrates, and in the spirit of the meaning given to it by the whole of antiquity, standing for the guardian spirit, an angel, not a devil of satanic descent, as theology will have it. The Roman Catholic Church shows its usual logic and consistency by accepting as the Ferue of Christ Saint Michael, who was his angel guardian, as proved by Saint Thomas, while he calls the prototypes of Michael and his synonyms, such as Mercury, for example, devils. Note, in the work of Marangoni, Delle gradezze dell'Arcangelo Sancto Michaele, the author exclaims, "O star, the greatest of those that follow the Son, who is Christ! O living image of divinity! O great thaumaturgist of the Old Testament! O invisible vicar of Christ within his church!" etc., etc. The work is in great honor in the Latin Church. End of note. The Church accepts positively the tenet that Christ has his Ferue, as any other god or mortal has, writes de Merville. Here we have the two heroes of the Old Testament, the Verbum, within brackets, ? Or the second Jehovah, and his face, presence, as the Protestants translate, forming both but one, and yet being too a mystery which seemed to us insolvable before we had studied the doctrine of Mazdean Ferué, and learnt that the Ferué was the spiritual potency at once image, face, and the guardian of the soul, which finally assimilates the Ferué. Mémoire à l'Académie, Volume 5, page 516. This is almost correct. Among other absurdities, the Kabbalists maintain that the word Metatron, being divided into meta, throno, meta, thronon, means near the throne. It means quite the reverse, as meta means beyond and not near. This is of great importance in our argument. Saint Michael, then, the Quiut Deus, is the translator, so to speak, of the invisible world into the visible and the objective. They maintain, furthermore, along with the Roman Catholic Church, that in the biblical and Christian theology there does not exist a higher celestial personality after the Trinity than that of the Archangel or the Seraphim Michael. According to them, the conqueror of the dragon is the archisatrap of the sacred militia, the guardian of the planets, the king of the stars, the slayer of Satan, and the most powerful rector. In the mystic astronomy of these gentlemen, he is the conqueror of Ahriman, who, having upset the sidereal throne of the usurper, bathed in his stead in the soul of fires. And, defender of the Christ Son, he approaches so near his master that he seems to become one with him, owing to this fusion with the Word, verbum. The Protestants, and among them Calvin, ended by losing sight entirely of the duality and saw no Michael, but only his master, writes the Abbé Caron. The Roman Catholics, and especially their Kabbalists, know better, and it is they who explain to the world this duality, which affords to them the means of glorifying the chosen ones of the Church, and of rejecting and anathematizing all those gods who may be in the way of their dogmas. Thus the same titles and the same names are given in turn to God and the Archangel. Both are called Metatron. Both have the name of Jehovah applied to them when they speak one in the other, as it reads, as, according to the Zohar, the term signifies equally the master and the ambassador. Both are the angel of the face, because, as we are informed, if, on the other hand, the Word is called the face or the presence, and the image of the substance of God on the other, when speaking of the Saviour to the Israelites, Isaiah, within brackets, question mark, tells them that the angel of his presence saved them in their affliction, so he was their Saviour. Note, see Isaiah 63, verses 8 to 9. Elsewhere, he, Michael, is called very plainly the Prince of the Faces of the Lord, the glory of the Lord. Both Jehovah and Michael are the guides of Israel, chiefs of the armies of the Lord, supreme judges of the souls, and even seraphs. See la face et la représentant du Verbe, page 18 by de Merville. The whole of the above is given on the authority of various works by Roman Catholics and must therefore be orthodox. Some expressions are translated to show what subtle theologians and casuists mean by the term Ferué, a word borrowed by some French writers from the Zendavesta, as said and utilized in Roman Catholicism for a purpose Zoroaster was very far from anticipating. Note, that which is called in the Vendidad Farvarshi, the immortal part of an individual, that which outlives man, the higher ego, say the occultists, or the divine double. End of note. In Fargod 19 of the Vendidad, it is said in verse 14, Invoke, O Zarathustra, my Farvarshi, who am Ahura Mazda, the greatest, the best, the fairest of all beings, the most solid, the most intelligent, and whose soul is the holy word, Matra Spenta. The French Orientalists translate Farvarshi by Ferué. Now what is a Ferué or Farvarshi? In some Mazdean works, for example, Ormazd Ahriman, sections 112 and 113, it is plainly implied that Farvarshi is the inner immortal man, or that ego which reincarnates, that it existed before its physical body and survives all such it happens to be clothed in. Not only man was endowed with the Farvarshi, but gods too, and the sky, fire, waters, and plants. From Introduction to Divinidad by J. Darmstädter. This shows as plainly as can be shown that the Feroe is the spiritual counterpart of whether god, animal, plant, or even element, that is, the refined and the purer part of the grosser creation, the soul of the body, whatever the body may happen to be. Therefore does Ahura Mazda recommend Zarathustra to invoke his Farvarshi and not himself, Ahura Mazda. That is to say, the impersonal and true essence of deity, one with Zoroaster's own Atman, or Christos, not the false and personal appearance. This is quite clear. Now it is on this divine and ethereal prototype that the Roman Catholic seized so as to build up the supposed difference between their god and angels and the deity of its aspects, or the gods of the old religions. Thus, while calling Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, whether as gods or planets, devils, they yet make of the same Mercury the Feroe of their Christ. This fact is undeniable. Vossius proves that Michael is the Mercury of the pagans, and Maury and other French writers corroborate him, and add that according to great theologians Mercury and the Sun are one, within brackets ? And no wonder, they think, since Mercury, being so near the wisdom of the Verbum, the Sun, must be absorbed by and confounded with him. This, quote, pagan, unquote, view was accepted from the 1st century of our era, as shown in the original Acts of the Apostles, the English translation being worthless. So much is Michael the Mercury of the Greeks and other nations, that when the inhabitants of Lystra mistook Paul and Barnabas for Mercury and Jupiter, the gods have come down to us in the likeness of men, see verse 12 or 14, and adds, and they called Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes or Mercury, because he was the leader of the word, verbum, and not the chief speaker, as erroneously translated in the Authorized and repeated even in the Revised English Bible. Michael is the angel in the vision, the Son of God, who was like unto a son of man. It is the Hermes Christos of the Gnostics, the Anubis Sirius of the Egyptians, the counselor of Osiris in Amenti, the Michael Lentoid, or Theomorphos of the Ophites, who wears on certain Gnostic jewels a lion head, like his father Ildebaut. See King's Gnostics. Now to all this the Roman Catholic Church consents tacitly, many of her writers avowing it publicly, and unable to deny the flagrant borrowing of their Church, who spoilt the symbols of her seniors, as the Jews had spoilt the Egyptians of their jewels of silver and gold. They explain the fact quite coolly and as seriously. Thus the writers who were hitherto timid enough to see in this repetition by Christian dogmas of old pagan ideas a legendary plagiarism perpetrated by man are gravely assured that, far from such a simple solution of the almost perfect resemblance, it has to be attributed to quite another cause, to a prehistorical plagiarism of a superhuman origin. If the reader would know how, he must kindly turn to the same 5th volume of de Merville's work. Please note that this author was the official and recognized defender of the Roman Church, and was helped by the learning of all the Jesuits. On page 518 we read, quote, we have pointed out several demigods, and also very historical heroes of the pagans, who were predestined from the moment of their birth to ape, while dishonoring it, the nativity of the hero, who was quite God, before whom the whole earth had to bow. We traced them being born as he was, from an immaculate mother. We saw them strangling serpents in their cradles, fighting against demons, performing miracles, dying as martyrs, descending to the netherworld, and rising again from the dead. And we have bitterly deplored that timid and shy Christians should feel compelled to explain all such identities on the grounds of coincidence of myth and symbol. They forgot apparently these words of the Saviour: "All that came before me are thieves and robbers," a word which explains all without any absurd negation, and which I commented in these words: "The Evangel is a sublime drama, parodied and played before its appointed time by ruffians." Unquote. The ruffians, les drôles, are of course demons, whose manager is Satan. Now this is the easiest and the most sublime of the simple way of getting out of the difficulty. The Reverend Dr. Lundy, a Protestant de Merville, followed the happy suggestion in his work Monumental Christianity, and so did Dr. Seppo of München in his works written to prove the divinity of Jesus and the satanic origin of all other saviors. So much greater the pity that a systematic and collective plagiarism, which went on for several centuries on the most gigantic scale, should be explained by another plagiarism, this time in the fourth Gospel. For the sentence quoted from it, "All that ever came before me," etc., is a verbatim repetition of words written in the Book of Enoch, 89. In the introduction to Archbishop Lawrence's translation of it from an Ethiopic manuscript, in the Bodleian Library, the editor-author of The Evolution of Christianity remarks, "In revising the proof sheets of the Book of Enoch, the parable of the sheep rescued by the Good Shepherd from hireling guardians and ferocious wolves is obviously borrowed by the fourth evangelist from Enoch, 89, in which the author depicts the shepherds as killing the sheep before the advent of their Lord, and thus discloses the true meaning of that hitherto mysterious passage in the Johannine parable. All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, language in which we now detect an obvious reference to the allegorical shepherds of Enoch." Unquote. It is too late in the day to claim that it is Enoch who borrowed from the New Testament instead of vice versa. Jude 14-15 quotes verbatim from Enoch a long passage about the coming of the Lord with his 10,000 saints, and naming specifically the prophet, acknowledge the source. This parallelism between prophet and apostle have placed beyond controversy that, in the eyes of the author of an epistle accepted as divine revelation, the Book of Enoch was the inspired production of an antediluvian patriarch, and further, the cumulative coincidence of language and ideas in Enoch and the others of New Testament scripture clearly indicates that the work of the Semitic Milton was the inexhaustible source from which evangelists and apostles, or the men who wrote in their names, borrowed their conceptions of the resurrection, judgment, immortality, perdition, and of the universal reign of righteousness under the eternal dominion of the Son of Man. This evangelical plagiarism culminates in the revelation of John, which adapts the visions of Enoch to Christianity, with modifications in which we miss the sublime simplicity of the great master of apocalyptic prediction, who prophesied in the name of the antediluvian patriarch. Unquote. From Introduction 35. Antediluvian truly, but if the phraseology of the text dates hardly a few centuries or even millenniums before the historical era, then it is no more the original prediction of the events to come, but in its turn a copy of some scripture of a prehistoric religion. In the Krita age, Vishnu, in the form of Kapila and other inspired sages, imparts to the world true wisdom as Enoch did. In the Treta age, he restrains the wicked in the form of universal monarch, Chakravartin, or the everlasting King of Enoch, and protects the three worlds or races. Note: cite Uriel, chapter 26, verse 3 in the book of Enoch. All those who have received mercy shall forever bless God, the everlasting King, who will reign over them. End of note. In the Dwapara age, in the person of Veda Vyasa, he divides the one Veda into 4 and distributes it into hundreds, sata, of branches. Unquote. Truly so. The Veda of the earliest Aryans, before it was written, went forth into every nation of the Atlanto-Lemurians, and sowed the first seeds of all the now existing old religions. The offshoots of the never-dying tree of wisdom have scattered their dead leaves even on Judeo-Christianity, and at the end of the Kali, our present age, Vishnu, or the everlasting King, will appear as Kalki, and re-establish righteousness upon earth. The minds of those who live at that time shall be awakened, and become as pellucid as crystal. The men who are thus changed by virtue of that peculiar time, the sixth race, shall be as the seeds of other human beings, and shall give birth to a race who shall follow the laws of the Krita age of purity. That is, it shall be the seventh race, the race of Buddhas, the sons of God, born of immaculate parents. Subsection B. The gods of light proceed from the gods of darkness. Thus it is pretty well established that Christ, the Logos, or the God in space and the Saviour on earth, is but one of the echoes of the same antediluvian and sorely misunderstood wisdom. The history begins by the descent on earth of the gods who incarnate in mankind, and this is the fall. Whether Brahma hurled down on earth in the allegory by Bhagavant or Jupiter by Kronos, all are the symbols of the human races. Once landed on, and having touched this planet of dense matter, no snow-white wings of the highest angel can remain immaculate, or the avatar or incarnation be perfect, as every such avatar is the fall of a god into generation. Nowhere is the metaphysical truth more clear when explained esoterically, or more hidden from the average comprehension of those who, instead of appreciating the sublimity of the idea, can only degrade, than in the Upanishads, the esoteric glossaries of the Vedas. The Rig Veda, as Guinor characterized it, is the most sublime conception of the great highways of humanity. The Vedas are, and will remain forever in the esotericism of the Vedanta and the Upanishads, the mirror of the eternal wisdom. For over 16 centuries, the new masks forced on the faces of the old gods have screened them from public curiosity, but they have finally proved a misfit. Yet the metaphorical fall, and as metaphorical atonement and crucifixion, led Western humanity through roads knee-deep in blood. Worse than all, they led it to believe in the dogma of the evil spirit, distinct from the spirit of all good, whereas the former lives in all matter and preeminently in man. Finally, it created the god-slandering dogma of hell and eternal perdition. It spread a thick film between the high institutions of man and divine verities, and most pernicious result of all, it made people remain ignorant of the fact that there were no fiends, no dark demons in the universe before man's own appearance on this and probably on other earths. Henceforth, the people were led to accept, as the problematical consolation for this world's sorrows, the thought of original sin. The philosophy of that law in nature which implants in man as well as in every beast a passionate, inherent, and instinctive desire for freedom and self-guidance pertains to psychology and cannot be touched on now. To show the feeling in higher intelligences, to analyze and give a natural reason for it, would necessitate, moreover, an endless philosophical explanation for which there is no room here. Perhaps the best synthesis of this feeling is found in 3 lines of Milton's Paradise Lost. Says the fallen one, quote, "Here we may reign secure, and in my choice, to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." Unquote. Better be man, the crown of terrestrial production and king over its opus operatum, than be lost among the will-less spiritual hosts in heaven. We have said elsewhere that the dogma of the first fall rested on a few verses in Revelation, these verses being now shown in plagiarism from Enoch by some scholars. These grew into endless theories and speculations, which gradually acquired the importance of dogma and inspired tradition. Every one wanted to explain the verse about the 7-headed dragon with his 10 horns and 7 crowns, whose tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and it cast them to the earth, and whose place, with that of his angels, was found no more in heaven. What the 7 heads of the dragon, cycle, mean, and its 5 wicked kings also, may be learned in the addenda, which close part 3 of this volume. From Newton to Bossuet, speculations were incessantly evolved in Christian brains with regard to these obscure verses. Quote, "The stars that falls is the Heresiarch Theodosius," unquote, explains Bossuet. "The clouds of smoke are the heresies of the Montanists. The 3rd part of the stars are the martyrs, and especially the doctors of divinity." Unquote. Bossuet ought to have known, however, that the events described in Revelation were not original, and may, as shown, be found in other and pagan traditions. There were no scholastics nor Montanists during Vedic times, nor yet far later in China, but Christian theology had to be protected and saved. This was only natural. But why should truth be sacrificed in order to protect from destruction the lucubrations of Christian theologians? The Princeps Aries Huius, the prince of the air of St. Paul, is not the devil but the effects of the astral light, as Eliphas Levi correctly explains. The devil is not the god of this period, as he says, for it is the deity of every age and period since man appeared on earth, and matter, in its countless forms and states, had to fight for its evanescent existence among other disintegrating forces. The quote, "dragon," unquote, is simply the symbol of the cycle and of the sons of Manvantaric eternity, who had descended on earth during a certain epoch of its formative period. The clouds of smoke are a geological phenomenon. The 3rd part of the stars of heaven cast down to the earth refers to the divine monads, the spirit of the stars in astrology, that circumambulate our globe, that is, the human egos destined to perform the whole cycle of incarnations. This sentence, qui circumambulant terram, however, is again referred to the devil in theology, the mythical father of evil being said to fall like lightning. Unfortunately for this interpretation, the Son of Man, or Christ, is expected on the personal testimony of Jesus to descend on earth likewise, as the lightning cometh out of the east, just in the same shape and under the same symbol as Satan, who is seen as lightning to fall from heaven. See Matthew 24, verse 27, and Luke 10, verse 18. All these metaphors and figures of speech, preeminently oriental in their character, must have their origin searched for in the East. In all the ancient cosmogonies, light comes from darkness. In Egypt, as elsewhere, darkness was the principle of all things. Hence Pimander, the thought divine, issues as light from darkness. Behemoth is the principle of darkness, or Satan in Roman Catholic theology, and yet Job says of him that Behemoth is the chief principle of the ways of God. Principium viarum domini Behemoth, chapter 40, verse 19. Consistency does not seem to be a favorite virtue in any portion of divine revelation, so-called, not as interpreted by theologians at any rate. The Egyptians and the Chaldeans referred the birth of their divine dynasties to that period when creative Earth was in her last final throes, in giving birth to her prehistoric mountain ranges, which have since disappeared, her seas and her continents. Her face was covered with deep darkness, and in that secondary chaos was the principle of all things that developed on the globe later on. And our geologists have ascertained that there was such a terrestrial conflagration in the early geological periods 700 millions of years ago. Note on Behemoth. The Protestant Bible defines Behemoth incorrectly, the elephant, as some think. See marginal note in Job 40, verse 19, in the authorized versions. A note on terrestrial conflagration. Astronomy, however, knows nothing of stars that have disappeared unless from visibility, never from existence, since the science of astronomy became known. Temporary stars are only variable stars, and it is believed even that the new stars of Kepler and Tycho Brahe may still be seen. End of notes. As to the tradition itself, every country and nation had it, each under its respective national form. It is not alone Egypt, Greece, Scandinavia, or Mexico that had their Typhon, Python, Loki, and its falling demon, but China also. The Celestials have a whole literature upon the subject. In King, it is said that, in consequence of a rebellion against Ti, of a proud spirit who said he was Ti himself, 7 choirs of celestials were exiled upon earth, which brought a change in all nature, heaven itself bending down and uniting with earth. And in the I King one reads, the flying dragon, superb and rebellious, suffers now, and his pride is punished. He thought he would reign in heaven, he reigns only on the earth. Again, the Chon Tsiu says allegorically, one night the stars ceased shining in darkness and deserted it, falling down like rain upon the earth, where they are now hidden. These stars are the monads. Chinese cosmogonies have their lords of the flame and their celestial virgin with little spirits to help and minister to her, and big spirits to fight those who are the enemies of other gods. But all this does not prove that the said allegories are presentments or prophetic writings, which all refer to Christian theology. The best proof one can offer to Christian theologians that the esoteric meaning in the Bible in both testaments was the assertion of the same idea as in our archaic teachings, to wit, that the fall of the angels referred simply to the incarnation of angels who had broken through the 7 circles, is found in the Zohar, is the soul and essence of its allegory, as the later Christian Kabbalah is the dark-cloaked Mosaic Pentateuch, and it says in the Agrippa manuscripts, the wisdom of the Kabbalah rests in the science of equilibrium and harmony. Forces that manifest without having been first equilibrized perish in space, equilibrized meaning differentiated. Thus perished the first kings, the divine dynasties, of the ancient world, the self-produced princes of giants. They fell like rootless trees and were seen no more, for they were the shadow of the shadow, to wit, the chaya of the shadowy Pitris. Read about the kings of Edom. But those that came after them, who, shooting down like falling stars, were enshrined in the shadows, prevailed, and to this day, Dionys, who by incarnating in those empty shadows inaugurated the era of mankind. Every sentence in the ancient cosmogonies unfolds to him who can read between the lines the identity of the ideas, though under different garbs. The first lesson taught in esoteric philosophy is that the incognizable cause does not put forth evolution, whether consciously or unconsciously, but only exhibits periodically different aspects of itself to the perception of finite minds. Now the collective mind, the universal, composed of various and numberless hosts of creative powers, however infinite and in manifested time, is still finite when contrasted with the unborn and undecaying space in its supreme essential aspects. That which is finite cannot be perfect. Therefore there are inferior beings among those hosts, but there never were any devils or disobedient angels, for the simple reason that they are all governed by law. The Asuras, who incarnated, call them by any other name, followed in this law as implacable as any other. They had manifested prior to the Pitris, and as time in space proceeds in cycles, their turn had come. Hence the numerous allegories. Vide Demon est Deus in Versus, in Part 2, Volume 1. The name of Asura was first given by the Brahmans indiscriminately to those who opposed their mummeries and sacrifices, and as the great Asura called Asurendra did. It is to those ages, probably, that the origin of the idea of the demon as opposer and adversary has to be traced. The Hebrew Elohim, called in the translations God and who create light, are identical with the Aryan Asuras. They are also referred to as the sons of darkness, as a philosophical and logical contrast to light immutable and eternal. The earliest Zoroastrians did not believe in evil or darkness being co-eternal with good or light, and they give the same interpretation. Ahriman is the manifested shadow of Ahura Mazda, Asura Mazda, himself issued from Zeruana Akerne, boundless circle of time, or the unknown cause. Its glory, they say of the latter, is too exalted, its light too resplendent for either human intellect or mortal eye to grasp and see. Its primal emanation is eternal light, which, from having been previously concealed in darkness, was called to manifest itself, and thus was formed Ormazd, the king of life. He is the firstborn in boundless time, but, like his own antitype, pre-existing spiritual idea, has lived within darkness from all eternity. The 6 Amshaspends, 7 with himself chief of all, the primitive spiritual angels and men are collectively his logos. The Zoroastrian Amshaspends create the world in 6 days, or periods also, and rest on the 7th, whereas that 7th is the first period or day in esoteric philosophy, and primary creation in the Aryan cosmogony. It is that intermediate aeon which is the prologue to creation, and which stands on the borderland between the uncreated eternal causation and the produced finite effects, a state of nascent activity and energy as the first aspect of the eternal immutable quiescence. In Genesis, on which no metaphysical energy has been spent, but only an extraordinary acuteness and ingenuity to veil the esoteric truth, creation begins at the 3rd stage of manifestation. God or the Elohim are the 7 regions of Pimander. They are identical with all the other creators. But even in Genesis, that period is hinted at by the abruptness of the picture and the, quote, darkness, unquote, that was on the face of the deep. The Alachim are shown to create, that is to say, to build or to produce the 2 or double heaven, not heaven and earth, which means, in so many words, that they separated the upper manifested angelic heaven, or plane of consciousness, from the lower or terrestrial plane, the to us eternal and immutable aeons from those periods that are in space, time, and duration, heaven from earth, the unknown from the known to the profane. Such is the meaning of the sentence in Pimander, which says that thought, the divine, which is light and life, Zeruana Akerne, produced through its word or first aspect the other operating regions, enclosing within their circle the world of senses, named fatal destiny. The latter refers to karma, the 7 circles or the 7 planets and planes, as also the 7 invisible spirits in the angelic spheres. Those visible symbols are the 7 planets, the 7 rishis of the Great Bear, and other glyphs. Note, another proof, if any were needed, that the ancient initiates knew of more than 7 planets is to be found in the Vishnu Purana, Book 2, Chapter 12, where, describing the chariots attached to Dhruva, the pole star. Parasara speaks of the chariots of the 9 planets, which are attached by aerial cords. End of note. As said of the Adityas by Roth, they are neither sun nor moon, nor stars nor dawn, but the eternal sustainers of this luminous life, which exists, as it were, behind all these phenomena. Unquote. It is they, the 7 hosts, who, having considered in their Father divine thought the plan of the operator, as says Pimander, desired to operate or build the world with its creatures likewise, for, having been born within the sphere of operation, the manifesting universe, such is the manvanteric law. And now comes the second portion of the passage, or rather of 2 passages merged into one to conceal the full meaning. Those who were born within the sphere of operation were the brothers who loved him well. The latter, the him, were the primordial angels, the asuras, the Ariman, the Elohim, or sons of God, of whom Satan was one. All those spiritual beings who are called the angels of darkness, because that darkness is absolute light, a fact now neglected, if not entirely forgotten in theology. Nevertheless, the spirituality of those much abused sons of light, which is darkness, must be evidently as great in comparison with that of the angels next in order as the ethereality of the latter would be, when contrasted with the density of the human body. The former are the firstborn, therefore so near to the confines of pure quiescent spirit as to be merely the privations, in the Aristotelian sense, the ferroués, or the ideal types of those who followed. They could not create material, corporeal things, and therefore were said in process of time to have refused to create, as commanded by, quote, God, unquote, otherwise to have rebelled. Perchance this is justified on that principle of the scientific theory which teaches us about light and sound and the effect of 2 waves of equal length meeting. If the 2 sounds be of the same intensity, their coincidence produces a sound 4 times the intensity of either, while their interference produces absolute silence. Explaining some of the, quote, heresies, unquote, of his day, Justin Martyr shows the identity of all the world religions at their starting points. The first beginning opens invariably with the unknown and passive deity from which emanates a certain active power or virtue, the mystery that is sometimes called wisdom, sometimes the Son, very often God, angel, Lord, and Logos. Note. See Justin, page 284. End of note. The latter is sometimes applied to the very first emanation, but in several systems it proceeds from the first androgyne or double ray produced at the beginning by the unseen. Philo depicts this wisdom as male and female, but though its first manifestation had a beginning, for it proceeded from Ulum, Aion, time, the highest of the aeons, when emitted from the Father, it had remained with him before all creations, for it is part of him. Notes. Ulum, Aion, a division indicative of time. End of note. Note. Salconiathon calls time the oldest aeon, protogonos, the firstborn. End of note. Therefore, Philo-Judaeus calls Adam Kadmon mind, the anoia of Bythos in the Gnostic systems. The mind, let it be named Adam. Note. See Philo-Judaeus, Cain and his birth, page 17. End of note. As the old Magian books explain it, the whole event becomes clear. A thing can only exist through its opposite, Hegel teaches us, and only a little philosophy and spirituality are needed to comprehend the origin of the late dogma, which is so truly satanic and infernal in its cold and cruel wickedness. The Magians accounted for the origin of evil in their exoteric teachings in this way. Light can produce nothing but light, and can never be the origin of evil. How then was the evil produced, since there was nothing co-equal or like the light in its production? Light, they say, produced several beings, all of them spiritual, luminous, and powerful. But a great one, the great Asura, Atman, Lucifer, etc., etc., had an evil thought, contrary to the light. He doubted, and by that doubt he became dark. This is a little nearer to the truth, but still wide of the mark. There was no evil thought that originated the opposing power, but simply thought per se, something which, being cogitative and containing design and purpose, is therefore finite and must thus find itself naturally in opposition to pure quiescence, the as natural state of absolute spirituality and perfection. It was simply the law of evolution that asserted itself, the progress of mental unfolding, differentiated from spirit, involved and entangled already with matter, into which it is irresistibly drawn. Ideas, in their very nature and essence, as conceptions bearing relation to objects, whether true or imaginary, are opposed to absolute thought, that unknowable all of whose mysterious operations Mr. Spencer predicates that nothing can be said, but that, quote, it has no kinship of nature with evolution, unquote, from Principles of Psychology, paragraph 474, which it certainly has not. The Zohar gives it very suggestively. When the Holy One, the Logos, desired to create man, he called the highest host of angels and said to them what he wanted. But they doubted the wisdom of this desire and answered, Man will not continue one night in his glory, for which they were burnt, within brackets annihilated, by the Holy Lord. Then he called another lower host and said the same, and they contradicted the Holy One. What is the good of man, they argued. Still Elohim created man, and when man sinned, there came the hosts of Uzzah and Azael, and twitted God. Here is the Son of Man that thou hast made, they said. Behold, he sinned. Then the Holy One replied, If you had been among them, men, you would have been worse than they. And he threw them from their exalted position in heaven even down on the earth. And they were changed into men, and sinned after the women of the earth. See Zohar 9b. This is quite plain. No mention is made in Genesis of these sons of God, in chapter 6, having been punished for it. The only reference to it in the Bible is in Jude 6. Quote, And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Unquote. And this means simply that the angels, doomed to incarnation, are in the chains of flesh and matter, under the darkness of ignorance, till the great day, which will come, as always, after the seventh round, after the expiration of the week, on the seventh Sabbath, or in the post-manvantaric nirvana. How truly esoteric and consonant with the secret doctrine is Pimander, the thought divine of Hermes, may be inferred from its original and primitive translations in Latin and Greek only. On the other hand, how disfigured it has been later on by Christians in Europe is seen from the remarks and unconscious confessions made by de Saint-Marc in his preface and letter to the Bishop of Aire in 1578. Therein the whole cycle of transformations from a pantheistic and Egyptian into a mystic Roman Catholic treatise is given, and we see how Pimander has become what it is now. Still, even in Saint-Marc's translation, traces are found of the real Pimander, the universal thought or mind. This is the verbatim translation from the Old French translation, the original being given in the footnote in its quaint Old French. Note, section 16, chapter 1, Mercure trismégiste Pimandre. On m'a pensé que s'ensuit-il, car je désirais grandement ce propos. Pimandre dicte, ceci est un mystère scellé, jusqu'à ce aujourd'hui, car nature, son mestant avec l'homme, a produit le miracle très merveilleux, ayant celui qui y était dit, la nature de l'harmonie de cette du Père et de l'Esprit. Nature ne s'arrêta pas là, mais un continent a produit 7 hommes, selon la nature de 7 gouverneurs et puissants de 2 sexes, et isolés. La génération de ces 7 s'est donnée en cette manière, and a gap is made in the translation which can be filled partially by resorting to the Latin text of Apuleius. The commentator, the bishop, says, nature produced in him, man, 7 men, or 7 principles. End of note. In English, 7 men principles were generated in man, the nature of the harmony of the 7 of the Father and of the Spirit. Nature produced 7 men in accordance with the 7 natures of the 7 spirits, having in them potentially the 2 sexes. Unquote. So metaphysically, the Father and the Son are the universal mind and the periodical universe, the, quote, angel and the, quote, man, unquote. It is the Son and the Father at one and the same time. In Pimander, the active idea and the passive thought that generates it, the radical keynote in nature, which gives birth to the 7 notes, the septenary scale of the creative forces, and to the 7 prismatic aspects of color, all born from the one white ray or light, itself generated in darkness. Subsection C. The many meanings of the war in heaven. The secret doctrine points out as a self-evident fact that mankind collectively and individually is, with all manifested nature, the vehicle A of the breath of the one universal principle in its primal differentiation, and B of the countless breaths proceeding from that one breath in its secondary and further differentiations, as nature, with its many mankinds, proceeds downwards toward the planes that are ever increasing in materiality. The primary breath informs the higher hierarchies, the secondary, the lower, on the constantly descending planes. Now there are many passages in the Bible which prove on their face exoterically that this belief was at one time universal, and the most convincing are the 2 chapters Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14. Christian theologians are welcome to interpret both as referring to the great war before creation, the epos of Satan's rebellion, etc., if they so choose, but the absurdity of the idea is too apparent. Ezekiel addresses his lamentations and reproofs to the king of Tyre. Isaiah to King Ahaz, who indulged in the worship of idols, as did the rest of the nation, with the exception of a few initiates, the prophets so-called, who tried to arrest it on its way to exotericism or idolatry, which is the same thing. Let the student judge. In Ezekiel 28 it is said, Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus, Thus saith the Lord God, as we understand it, the god Karma, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a god, and yet thou art a man. Behold, I shall bring strangers upon thee, and they shall draw their swords against the beauty of thy wisdom, and they shall bring thee down to the pit, or earth life. The origin of the Prince of Tyrus is to be traced to and sought in the divine dynasties of the inquisitive Atlanteans, the great sorcerers. See last comments on stanza 12, verses 47 to 49. There is no metaphor in the words of Ezekiel, but actually history this time, for the voice in the prophet, the voice of the Lord, his own spirit, which spake unto him, says, Because thou hast said, I am a god, I sit in the seat of gods, divine dynasties, in the midst of the seas, yet thou art a man. Behold, thou art wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that they can hide from thee. With thy wisdom thou hast increased thy riches, and thine heart is lifted up because of thy riches. Behold, therefore, strangers shall draw their swords against the beauty of thy wisdom. They shall bring thee down, and thou shalt die the deaths of them that are slain in the midst of the seas. Verses 3-8. All such imprecations are not prophecy, but simply reminders of the fate of the Atlanteans, the giants on earth. What can be the meaning of this last sentence if it is not a narrative of the fate of the Atlanteans? Verse 17 saying, Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty, may refer to the heavenly man in Pimander, or to the fallen angels, who are accused of having fallen through pride on account of the great beauty and wisdom which became their lot. There is no metaphor here, except in the preconceived ideas of our theologians, perhaps. These verses relate to the past, and belong more to the knowledge acquired at the mysteries of an initiation than to retrospective clairvoyance. Says the voice again, Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God, in the Satya Yuga. Every precious stone was thy covering. The workmanship of thy tabrets and thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day thou wast created. Thou art the anointed cherub. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee. Therefore I will cast thee out of the mountain of God and destroy thee. Unquote. The mountain of God means the mountain of the gods, or Meru, whose representative in the fourth race was Mount Atlas, the last form of one of the divine titans. So high in those days that the ancients believed that the heavens rested on its top. Did not Atlas assist the giants in their war against the gods? From Hyginus. Another version shows the fable as arising from the fondness of Atlas, son of Iapetus and Clymene, for astronomy, and from his dwelling for that reason on the highest mountain peaks. The truth is that Atlas, the mountain of the gods, and also the hero that name, are the esoteric symbols of the fourth race and his 7 daughters, the Atlantids. The Atlantids are the symbol of its 7 sub-races. Mount Atlas, according to all the legends, was 3 times as high as it is now, having sunk at 2 different times. It is of a volcanic origin, and therefore the voice within Ezekiel says, I will bring forth a fire from the midst of thee, it shall devour thee, etc., verse 18. Surely it does not mean, as seems to be the case from the translated texts, that this fire was to be brought from the midst of the prince of Tyrus or his people, but from Mount Atlas, symbolizing the proud race, learned in magic and high in arts and civilization, whose last remnant was destroyed almost at the foot of the range of those once gigantic mountains. Truly, thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt thou be any more, as the very name of the race and its fate is now annihilated from man's memory. Bear in mind that almost every ancient king and priest was an initiate, that from toward the close of the fourth race there had been a feud between the initiates of the right and those of the left path. Finally, that the Garden of Eden is referred to by other personages than the Jews of the Adamic race, since even Pharaoh is compared to the fairest tree of Eden by this same Ezekiel, who shows all the trees of Eden, the choicest and best of Lebanon, comforted in the nether parts of the earth. For they also went down into hell with him, Pharaoh, unto the nether parts, which are in fact the bottom of the ocean, whose floor gaped wide to devour the lands of the Atlanteans and themselves. Note, the only pharaoh whom the Bible shows going down into the Red Sea was the king who pursued the Israelites, and who remained unnamed, for very good reasons, perhaps. The story was surely made up from the Atlantean legend. End of note. If one bears all this in mind and compares the various accounts, then one will find out that the whole of chapters 28 and 31 of Ezekiel relate neither to Babylon, Assyria, nor yet Egypt, since none of these have been so destroyed, but simply fell into ruins on the surface, not beneath the earth, but indeed to Atlantis and most of its nations. And he will see that the Garden of Eden of the initiates was no myth, but a locality now submerged. Light will dawn upon him, and he will appreciate such sentences as these at their true esoteric value. Thou hast been in Eden. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. For every nation had, and many still have, holy mountains, some Himalayan peaks, others Parnassus and Sinai. They were all places of initiation and the abodes of the chiefs of the communities of ancient and even modern adepts. And again, behold the Assyrian, within brackets, why not Atlantean initiate? ? Was a cedar in Lebanon. His height was exalted above all the trees. The cedars in the garden of God could not hide him, so that all the trees of Eden envied him. From Ezekiel 31, verses 3 to 9. Throughout all Asia Minor, the initiates were called the trees of righteousness and the cedars of Lebanon, as also were some kings of Israel. So were the great adepts in India, but only the adepts of the left hand. When Vishnu Purana narrates that the world was overrun with trees, while the Prakitasas, who passed 10,000 years of austerity into the vast ocean, were absorbed in their devotions, the allegory relates to the Atlanteans and the adepts of the early fifth race, the Aryans. Other trees, or adept sorcerers, spread and overshadowed the unprotected earth, and the people perished, unable to labor for 10,000 years. Then the sages, the rishis of the Aryan race, called Praketasas, are shown coming forth from the deep, and destroying by the wind and flame issuing from their mouths the iniquitous so-called trees and the whole vegetable kingdom, until Soma, the moon, the sovereign of the vegetable world, pacifies them by making alliance with the adepts of the right path, to whom he offers as bride Marisha, the offspring of the trees. Notes. See Vishnu Purana, Book 1, Chapter 15. And note, this is pure allegory. The waters are a symbol of wisdom and of occult learning. Hermes represented the sacred science under the symbol of fire, the northern initiates under that of water. The latter is the production of Nara, the spirit of God, or rather Paramatman, the supreme soul, says Kuluka Bhatta, Narayana, meaning he who abides in the deep, or plunged in the waters of wisdom, water being the body of Nara, Vayu. Hence arises the statement that for 10,000 years they remained in austerity in the vast ocean, and are shown emerging from it. Ea, the god of wisdom, is the sublime fish, and Dagon, or Oneness, is the Chaldean manfish who emerges from the waters to teach wisdom. End of notes. This means that which is given in the stanzas and commentaries, and what is also given in Part 2, Volume 1, The Sacred Island. It hints at the great struggle between the sons of God and the sons of the dark wisdom, our forefathers, or the Atlantean and the Aryan adepts. The whole history of that period is allegorized in the Ramayana, which is the mystic narrative in epic form of the struggle between Rama, the first king of the divine dynasty of the early Aryans, and Ravana, the symbolical personation of the Atlantean Lanka race. The former were the incarnations of the solar gods, the latter of the lunar devas. This was the great battle between good and evil, between white and black magic, for the supremacy of the divine forces, or of the lower terrestrial or cosmic powers. If the student would understand better the last statement, let him turn to the Anugita episode of the Mahabharata, chapter 5, where the Brahmana tells his wife, "I have perceived by means of the self the seat abiding in the self," the seat where dwells the Brahman free from the pairs of opposites and the moon, together with the fire of the sun, upholding all beings as the mover of the intellectual principle. Unquote. The moon is the deity of the mind, Manas, but only on the lower plane. Manas is dual, lunar in the lower, solar in its upper portion, says a commentary. That is to say, it is attracted in its higher aspect towards Buddhi, and in its lower descends into and listens to the voice of its animal soul, full of selfish and sensual desires, and herein is contained the mystery of an adept as of a profane man's life, as also that of the post-mortem separation of the divine from the animal man. The Ramayana, every line of which has to be read esoterically, discloses in magnificent symbolism and allegory the tribulations of both man and soul. Within the body, in the midst of all these life winds, within brackets question mark principles, which move about in the body and swallow up one another, blazes the Vaishvana fire sevenfold, of which I am the goal, says the Brahmana. Notes: swallow up one another. This is explained by the able translator of Anugita in a footnote, page 258, in these words. The sense appears to be this: the course of worldly life is due to the operations of the life winds which are attached to the self and lead to its manifestations as individual souls. And note, Vaisvanara or Vaishvanara is a word often used to denote the self, explains Nilakanta. But the chief soul is Manas or mind, hence Soma, the moon, is shown as making an alliance with the solar portion in it, personified as the Prachetasas. But of the 7 keys that open the 7 aspects of the Ramayana, as of every other scripture, this is only one, the metaphysical. The symbol of the tree, standing for various initiates, was almost universal. Jesus is called the tree of life, as also the adepts of the good law, while those of the life path are referred to as the withering trees. John the Baptist speaks of the axe, which is laid to the root of the trees, in Matthew chapter 3, verse 10. And the king of Assyria's armies are called trees, see Isaiah chapter 10, verse 19. The true meaning of the Garden of Eden was sufficiently given in Isis Unveiled. The writer has more than once heard surprise expressed that Isis should contain so few of the doctrines now taught. This is quite erroneous, for the allusions to such teachings are plentiful, even if the teachings themselves were still withheld. The time had not arrived then, as the hour has not struck now, to say all. No Atlanteans or the 4th race, which preceded our 5th race, are mentioned in Isis Unveiled, a critic on esoteric Buddhism wrote one day. I, who wrote Isis Unveiled, maintain that the Atlanteans are mentioned as our predecessors, namely in Volume 1, page 133, when speaking of the Book of Job. For what can be plainer than this? In the original text, instead of dead things, it is written dead Rephaim, giants, or mighty primitive men from whom evolution may one day trace our present race. It is invited to do so now that this hint is explained quite openly, but evolutionists are as sure to decline nowadays as they did 10 years ago. Science and theology are against us, therefore we question both, and have to do so in self-defense. On the strength of hazy metaphors scattered throughout the prophets and in St. John's Revelation, a grand but re-edited version of the Book of Enoch, on these insecure grounds Christian theology built its dogmatic epos of the war in heaven. It did more. It used the symbolical visions, intelligible only to the initiates, as pillars upon which to support the whole bulky edifice of its religion. And now the pillars have been found very weak reeds, and the cunning structure is foundering. The entire Christian scheme rests upon these Jachin and Boaz, the two contrary forces of good and evil, Christ and Satan, the agathoi kai kakai dynamis. Take away from Christianity its main prop by the fallen angels, and the Eden bower vanishes with its Adam and Eve into thin air, and Christ, in the exclusive character of the one God and Saviour and the victim of atonement for the sin of animal man, becomes forthwith a useless, meaningless myth. In an old number of the Revue archéologique for the year 1845, page 41, a French writer, M. Maury, remarks, "This universal strife between good and bad spirits seems to be only the reproduction of another more ancient and more terrible strife that, according to an ancient myth, took place before the creation of the universe, between the faithful and the rebellious legions." Unquote. Once more, it is a simple question of priority. Had John's revelation been written during the Vedic period, and were not one sure now of its being simply another version of the Book of Enoch and the dragon legends of pagan antiquity, the grandeur and the beauty of the imagery might have biased the critic's opinion in favor of the Christian interpretation of that first war, whose battlefield was starry heaven, and the first slaughterers the angels. As the matter stands now, however, one has to trace revelation, event by event, to other and far older visions. For the better comprehension of the apocalyptic allegories and of the esoteric epos, we ask the reader to turn to Revelation and to read chapter 12 from verse 1 to verse 7. This has several meanings, most of which have been found out with regard to the astronomical and numerical keys of this universal myth. That which may be given now is a fragment, a few hints as to its secret meaning, as embodying the record of a real war, the struggle between the initiates of the two schools. Many and various are the still existing allegories built on that same foundation stone. The true narrative, that which gives the full esoteric meaning, is in the secret books, but the writer has had no access to these. In the exoteric works, however, the episode of the Taraka War and some esoteric commentaries may offer a clue, perhaps. In every Purana, the event is described with more or less variations, which show its allegorical character. In the mythology of the earliest Vedic Aryans, as in the later Puranic narratives, mention is made of Buddha, the wise, one learned in the secret wisdom, and who is the planet Mercury in his humorization. The Hindu classical dictionary credits Buddha with being the author of a hymn in the Rig Veda. Therefore, he can by no means be a later fiction of the Brahmins, but is a very old personation indeed. It is by inquiring into his genealogy, or theogony rather, that the following facts are disclosed. As a myth, he is the son of Tara, the wife of Brihaspati, the gold-colored, and the Soma, the male moon, who Paris-like carries this new Helen of the Hindu sidereal kingdom away from her husband, which causes a great strife and war in Svarga, heaven. The episode brings on a battle between the gods and the Asuras. King Soma finds allies in Uranus, Venus, the leader of the Danavas, and the gods are led by Indra and Rudra, who side with Brihaspati. The latter is helped by Sankara, Siva, who, having had for his guru Brihaspati's father, Angiras, befriends his son. Indra is here the Indian prototype of Michael, the archistrategist and the slayer of the dragon's angels, since one of his names is Jishnu, leader of the celestial host. Both fight, as some titans did, against other titans in defense of revengeful gods. One of Jupiter Tonans. In India, Brihaspati is the planet Jupiter, which is a curious coincidence. the other in support of the ever-thundering Rudra Sankara. During this war, he is deserted by his bodyguard, the storm gods, Maruts. The story is very suggestive in some of its details. Let us examine some of them and seek to discover their meaning. The presiding genius or regent of the planet Jupiter is Brihaspati, the wronged husband. He is the instructor or spiritual guru of the gods, who are the representatives of the procreative powers. In the Rig Veda, he is called Brahmanaspati, a name meaning the deity in whom the action of the worshipped upon the gods is personified. Hence, Brahmanaspati represents the materialization of the divine grace, so to say, by means of ritual and ceremonies, or the exoteric worship. Tara, his wife, is on the other hand the personification of the powers of one initiated into Gupta Vidya, secret knowledge, as will be shown. Soma is the moon astronomically, but in mystical phraseology it is also the name of the sacred beverage drunk by the Brahmins and the initiates during their mysteries and sacrificial rites. The Soma plant is Asclepias acida, which yields a juice from which that mystic beverage, the Soma drink, is made. Alone the descendants of the Rishis, the Agnihotri, the fire priests of the great mysteries, knew all its powers, but the real property of the true Soma was and is to make a new man of the initiate after he is reborn, namely one that he begins to live in his astral body. See the elixir of life. For his spiritual nature overcoming the physical, he would soon snap it off, and part even from that etherealized form. Notes: the elixir of life can be read in 5 Years of Theosophy. And note, the partaker of Soma finds himself both linked to his external body and yet away from it in his spiritual form. The latter, freed from the former, soars for the time being in the ethereal higher regions, becoming virtually as one of the gods, and yet preserving in his physical brain the memory of what he sees and learns. Plainly speaking, Soma is the fruit of the tree of knowledge, forbidden by the jealous Elohim to Adam and Eve, or Yahweh, lest man should become as one of us. End of note. Soma was never given in days of old to the non-initiated Brahman, the simple grihastha or priest of the exoteric ritual. Thus Brihaspati, guru of the gods though he was, still represented the dead-letter form of worship. It is Tara, his wife, the symbol of one who, though wedded to dogmatic worship, longs for true wisdom, who is shown as initiated into his mysteries by King Soma, the giver of that wisdom. Soma is thus made in the allegory to carry her away. The result of this is the birth of Buddha, esoteric wisdom, Mercury or Hermes in Greece and Egypt. He is represented as so beautiful that even the husband, though well aware that Buddha is not the progeny of his dead-letter worship, claims the newborn as his son, the fruit of his ritualistic and meaningless forms. We see the same in the modern exoteric religions. Such is, in brief, one of the meanings of the allegory. War in heaven refers to several events of that kind on various and different planes of being. The first is a purely astronomical and cosmical fact pertaining to cosmogony. Mr. John Bentley thought that with the Hindus war in heaven is only a figure referring to their calculations of time periods. See Bentley's Hindu Astronomy. Note: Historical Views of Hindu Astronomy. Quoting from the work in reference to Aryabhata, who is said to give a near approach to the true relation among the various values for the computations of the value of pi, the author of the Source of Measures reproduces a curious statement. Mr. Bentley, it is said, was greatly familiar with the Hindu astronomical and mathematical knowledge. This statement of his then may be taken as authentic. the same remarkable trait among so many Eastern and ancient nations of seriously concealing the arcana of this kind of knowledge is a marked one among the Hindus. That which was given out to be popularly thought and to be exposed to public inspection was but the approximate of a more exact but hidden knowledge, and this very formulation of Mr. Bentley will strangely exemplify the assertion, and explained would show that it, the Hindu exoteric astronomy and sciences, was derived from a system exact beyond the European one, in which Mr. Bentley himself, of course, trusted as far in advance of the Hindu knowledge at any time, in any generation, which is Mr. Bentley's misfortune, and does not take away from the glory of the ancient Hindu astronomers, who were all initiates. End of note. This served as a prototype, he thinks, for the Western nations to build their war of the Titans upon. The author is not quite wrong, but neither is he quite right. If the sidereal prototype refers indeed to a pre-Manvantaric period and rests entirely on the knowledge claimed by the Aryan initiates of the whole program and progress of cosmogony, the War of the Titans is but a legendary and deified copy of the real war that took place in the Himalayan Kailasa, heaven, instead of in the depth of cosmic interplanetary space. Note: the secret doctrine teaches that every event of universal importance, such as geological cataclysms at the end of one race and the beginning of a new one, involving a great change each time in mankind, spiritual, moral and physical, is precogitated and preconcerted, so to say, in the sidereal regions of our planetary system. Astrology is built wholly upon this mystic and intimate connection between the heavenly bodies and mankind, and it is one of the great secrets of initiation and occult mysteries. End of note. It is the record of the terrible strife between the sons of God and the sons of the shadow, of the fourth and the fifth races. It is on these two events, blended together by legends borrowed from the exoteric account of the war waged by the Asuras against the gods, that every subsequent national tradition on the subject has been built. Esoterically, the Asuras, transformed subsequently into evil spirits and lower gods, who are eternally at war with the great deities, are the gods of the secret wisdom. In the oldest portions of the Rig Veda, they are the spiritual and the divine, the term Asura being used for the supreme spirit and being the same as the great Ahura of the Zoroastrians. See Dharmstädtes Vendidad. There was a time when the gods Indra, Agni, and Varuna themselves belonged to the Asuras. In the Aitareya Brahmana, the breath, Asu, of Brahma Prajapati became alive, and from that breath he created the Asuras. Later on, after the war, the Asuras are called the enemies of the gods, hence Asuras, the initial A being a negative prefix, or no gods, the gods being referred to as Suras. This then connects the Asuras and their hosts, enumerated further on, with the fallen angels of the Christian churches, a hierarchy of spiritual beings to be found in every pantheon of ancient and even modern nations, from the Zoroastrian down to that of the Chinaman. They are the sons of the primeval creative breath at the beginning of every new Mahakalpa, or Manvantara, in the same rank as the angels who had remained faithful. These were the allies of Soma, the parent of the esoteric wisdom, as against Brihaspati, representing ritualistic or ceremonial worship. Evidently, they have been degraded in space and time into opposing powers or demons by the ceremonialists on account of their rebellion against hypocrisy, sham worship, and the dead letter form. Now, what is the real character of all those who fought along with them? They are one, the Usanas, or the host of the planet Venus, become now in Roman Catholicism Lucifer, the genius of the morning star. See Isaiah 14, verse 12. The Tsaba, or army of Satan. 2. The The Daityas and Danamas are the Titans, the demons of the sons of God and the daughters of men. Their generic name shows their alleged character, and discloses at the same time the secret animus of the Brahmins, for they are the Kratidvishas, the enemies of the sacrifices or exoteric shams. These are the hosts that fought against Brihaspati, the representative of exoteric popular and national religions, and Indra, the god of the visible heaven, the firmament, who in the early Veda is the highest god of cosmic heaven, the fit habitation for an extra-cosmic and personal god, higher than whom no exoteric worship can ever soar. 3. Then come the Nagas, the Sarpa, serpents, or seraphs. Note: the Nagas are described by the Orientalists as a mysterious people whose landmarks are found abundantly in India to this day, and who lived in Nagadvipa, one of the 7 continents or divisions of Bharatavarsha, Old India, the town of Nagpur being one of the most ancient cities in the country. End of note. These again show their character by the hidden meaning of the glyph. In mythology they are semi-divine beings with a human face and a tail of a dragon. They are therefore undeniably the Jewish seraphim, from Serapis and Sarpa, serpent, the plural being saraph, burning, fiery. See Isaiah chapter 6 verse 23. Christian and Jewish angelology distinguishes between the seraphim and the cherubim or cherubs, who come second in order. Esoterically and Kabbalistically they are identical, the cherubim being simply the name for the images or likeness of any of the divisions of the celestial hosts. Now, as said before, the dragons and nagas were the names given to the initiates hermits on account of their great wisdom and spirituality and their living in caves. Thus, when Ezekiel applies the adjective of cherub to the kings of Tyre and tells him that by his wisdom and his understanding there is no secret that can be hidden from him, in 5 verse 3 and 4 and chapter 28, he shows to an occultist that it is a prophet, perhaps still a follower of exoteric worship, who fulminates against an initiate of another school, and not against an imaginary Lucifer, a fallen cherub from the stars, and then from the Garden of Eden. Thus the so-called war is, in one of its many meanings, also an allegorical record of the strife between the two classes of adepts, of the right and of the left path. There were 3 classes of rishis in India who were the earliest adepts known: the royal or rayarshis, kings and princes, who adopted the ascetic life; the dervashis, divine or the sons of Dharma or Yoga; and brahmarshis, descendants of those rishis who were the founders of gotras, of Brahmans, or caste races. Now, leaving the mythical and astronomical keys for one moment aside, the secret teachings show many Atlanteans who belonged to these divisions, and there were strifes and wars between them, de facto and de jure. Narada, one of the greatest rishis, was a Deva rishi, and he is shown in constant and everlasting feud with Brahma, Daksha, and other gods and sages. Therefore, we may safely maintain that whatever the astronomical meaning of this universal accepted legend, its human phase is based on real and historical events, disfigured into a theological dogma only to suit ecclesiastical purposes. As above, so below. Sidereal phenomena and the behavior of the celestial bodies in the heavens were taken as a model, and the plan was carried out below on earth. Thus, space in its abstract sense was called the realm of divine knowledge, and by the Chaldees or initiates, Ab-Su, the habitat, or father, that is, the source, of knowledge, because it is in space that dwell the intelligent powers which invisibly rule the universe. Note: not less suggestive are the qualities attributed to Rudra Siva, the great yogi, the forefather of all the adepts, in esotericism one of the greatest kings of the divine dynasties, Called the earliest and the last, he is the patron of the third, fourth, and the fifth root races. For in his earliest character he is the ascetic Dig-ambara, clothed with the elements, Trilokana, the three-eyed, Pancha-ananda, the five-faced, an allusion to the past four and the present fifth race, for, though five-faced, he is only four-armed, as the fifth race is still alive. He is the god of time, Saturn Kronos, as his Damaru, drum, in the shape of an hourglass shows. And if he is accused of having cut off Brahma's fifth head and left him with only four, it is again an allusion to a certain degree in initiation, and also to the races. End of note. In the same manner, and on the plane of the zodiac, in the upper ocean or the heavens, a certain realm on earth, an inland sea, was consecrated and called the abyss of learning. 12 centers on it in the shape of 12 small islands representing the zodiacal signs, 2 of which remained for ages the mystery signs, and were the abodes of 12 hierophants and masters of wisdom. This sea of knowledge or learning remained for ages there, where now stretches the Shamu or Gobi desert. It existed until the last great glacial period, when a local cataclysm which swept the waters south and west, and so formed the present great desolate desert, left only a certain oasis with a lake and one island in the midst of it, as a relic of the zodiacal ring on earth. Notes. G. Seyfarth's idea that the signs of the zodiac were in ancient times only 10 is erroneous. 10 only were known to the profane. The initiates, however, knew them all, from the time of the separation of mankind into sexes, whence arose the separation of Virgo-Scorpio into 2, which, owing to a secret sign added, and the Libra invented by the Greeks, instead of the secret name, which was not given, made 12. Vide Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, on page 456. Note on the Sea of Knowledge or Learning. The above is perhaps a key to the Dalai Lama's symbolical name, the Ocean Lama, meaning the Wisdom Ocean. Abe Yuk speaks of it. End of notes. For ages, the watery abyss which, with the nations that preceded the later Babylonians, was the abode of the Great Mother, the terrestrial post-type of the Great Mother Chaos in heaven, the parent of Ea, wisdom, himself the early prototype of Oannes, the man-fish of the Babylonians. For ages, then, the abyss or chaos was the abode of wisdom and not of evil. The struggle of Bel and then of Merodach, the sun god, with Tiamat, the sea and its dragon, a war which ended in the defeat of the latter, has a purely cosmic and geological meaning, as well as an historical one. It is a page torn out of the history of the secret and sacred sciences, their evolution, growth, and death for the profane masses. It relates A. to the systematic and gradual drying up of immense territories by the fierce sun at a certain prehistoric period, one of the terrible droughts which ended by a gradual transformation of once fertile lands abundantly watered into the sandy deserts which they are now, and B. to the as systematic persecution of the prophets of the right path by those of the left, the latter having inaugurated the birth and evolution of the sacerdotal castes, have finally led the world into all these exoteric religions, invented to satisfy the depraved tastes of the hoi polloi and the ignorant for ritualistic pomp, and the materialization of the immaterial and unknowable principle. This was a certain improvement on the Atlantean sorcery, the memory which lingers in the remembrances of all the literary and Sanskrit-speaking portion of India, as well as in the popular legends. Still it was a parody on and the desecration of the sacred mysteries and their science. The rapid progress of anthropomorphism and idolatry led the early fifth, as it had already led the fourth race, into sorcery once more, though on a smaller scale. Finally, even the four, quote, Adams, unquote, symbolizing under other names the four preceding races, were forgotten, and, passing from one generation into another, each loaded with some additional myths, got at last drowned in that ocean of popular symbolism called the pantheons. Yet they exist to this day in the oldest Jewish traditions as the Tselem, the shadow Adam, the chias of our doctrine, the model Adam, the copy of the first and the male and female of the exoteric Genesis in chapter 1, the third, the earthly Adam before the fall, and the fourth, the Adam after his fall, that is, separated into sexes, or the pure Atlantean. The Adam of the Garden of Eden, or the forefather of our race, the fifth, is an ingenious compound of the above four. As stated in Zohar, Adam, the first man, is not found now on earth. He is not found in all below. Because where does the lower earth come from? From the chain of the earth and heaven above, that is, from the superior globes, those which precede and are above our earth. And there came out from it, the chain, creatures of all kinds, some of them in solid skins, some in shells, klippot, some in red shells, some in black, some in white, and some of other colors. See Kabbalah. As in the Chaldean cosmogony of Berosus and the stanzas just given, some treatises on the Kabbalah speak of creatures with two faces, some with four, and some with one face. For the highest Adam did not come down in all the countries or produce progeny and have many wives, but is a mystery. So is the dragon a mystery. Truly, says Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai, that to understand the meaning of the dragon is not given to the companions, students or chelas, but only to the little ones, that is, the perfect initiates. Note, such was the name given in ancient Judea to the initiates, called also the innocents and the infants, that is, once more reborn. This key opens a vista into one of the New Testament mysteries, the slaughter by Herod of the 40,000 innocents. There is a legend to this effect, and the event, which took place almost a century before Christ, shows the origin of the tradition blended at the same time with that of Krishna and his uncle Kansa. In the case of the New Testament, Herod stands for Alexander Jannaeus of Lydda, whose persecution and murder of hundreds and thousands initiates led to the adoption of the Bible story. End of note. The work of the beginning the companions understand, but it is only the little ones who understand the parable on the work in the Principium by the mystery of the serpent of the great sea. Note, the Zohar 2, verse 34. End of note. And those Christians who may happen to read this will also understand by the light of the above sentence who the Christ was. For Jesus states repeatedly that he who shall not receive the kingdom of God as a little child, he shall not enter therein. And if some of his sayings have been meant to apply to children without any metaphor, most of what relates to the little ones in the Gospels related to the initiates, of whom Jesus was one. Paul, Saul, is referred to in the Talmud as the little one. That mystery of the serpent was this. Our earth, or rather terrestrial life, is often referred to in the secret teachings as the great sea, the sea of life having remained to this day a favorite metaphor. The Sifra Zeniuta speaks of a primeval chaos and the evolution of the universe after a destruction, pralaya, comparing it to an uncoiling serpent, extending hither and thither, its tail in its mouth, the head twisting on its neck. It is enraged and angry. It watches and conceals itself. Every 1,000 days it is manifested. From 1 paragraph 16. A commentary on the Puranas says, Anantasesha is a form of Vishnu, the Holy Spirit of preservation, and a symbol of the universe on which it is supposed to sleep during the intervals of the days of Brahma. The 7 heads of Sesha support the universe. Unquote. So the Spirit of God sleeps, is breathing, Merakapet, over the chaos of undifferentiated matter before each new creation, Sifra Zenyuta. Now 1 day of Brahma is composed, as already explained, of 1,000 Mahayugas, and as each night or period of rest is equal in duration to this day, it is easy to see to what this sentence in Sifra Zenyuta refers, meaning that the serpent manifests once in 1,000 days. Nor is it more difficult to see whither the initiated writer of the Sifra is leading us when he says, Its head is broken in the waters of the great sea, as it is written, Thou dividest the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. 74 verse 13. It refers to the trials of the initiates in this physical life, the sea of sorrow, if read with 1 key. It hints at the successive destruction of the 7 spheres of a chain of worlds in the great sea of space, when read with another key. For every sidereal globe or sphere, every world, star, or group of stars, is called in symbolism the dragon's head. But however it may read, the dragon was never regarded as evil, nor was the serpent either, in antiquity. In the metaphors, whether astronomical, cosmical, theogonical, or simply physiological, that is phallic, the serpent was always regarded as a divine symbol. When it is said, the cosmic serpent which runs with 370 leaps, Sifra Zenyuta, paragraph 33, it means the cycle periods of the great tropical year, or 25,868 years, divided in the esoteric calculation into 370 periods or cycles, as 1 solar year is divided into 365 days. And if Michael was regarded by the Christians as the conqueror of Satan, the dragon, it is because in the Talmud this fighting personage is represented as the Prince of Waters, who had 7 subordinate spirits under him. A good reason why the Latin Church made him the patron saint of every promontory in Europe. In the Kabbalah, Sifra Zenyuta, the creative force makes sketches and spiral lines of his creation in the shape of a serpent. It holds its tail in its mouth because it is the symbol of endless eternity and of cyclic periods. Its meaning, however, would require a volume, and we must end. Thus the reader may now see for himself what are the several meanings of the war in heaven and of the great dragon, the most solemn and dreaded of church dogmas, the Alpha and Omega of Christian faith, and the pillar of its fall and atonement, dwindles down to a pagan symbol in the many allegories about those prehistoric struggles. Next section is 19. Is Pleroma Satan's lair?